Welcome to Kingdom Authority with James Alford, your source for insight on spiritual warfare, discernment, and the power of God. Be prepared for your eyes to be opened like never before and walk in the power of God's kingdom. Here is your host, James Alford.
Welcome to Kingdom Authority. My name is James Alford. Thank you for tuning in. As always, we'll be talking about subjects relating to spiritual warfare, discernment, and the power of God. My guest for today is Chris Parker. Welcome on, Chris.
Hey, Apostle, how you doing? It's good to have you. Good to be get to be here with you this week.
You talking like you, so you're going to be the host and I'm the guest. Is that what you're saying?
Nah. It's always a blessing to be here. Always a blessing.
I'm just messing with you. Our topic for today is hearing from God. I'm reading to you from Numbers 20:7. And it says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord, as he commanded him. Moses strikes the rock. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said to him, Now hear you rebels, must we fetch your water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly. And the congregation drank, and their beasts also." Okay. And so, here we have Moses, and the Lord had given him instruction. And we see that, he heard what the Lord said. Okay. But there was some lacking. And so in his application of what he heard from God. And I think this happens often to us as the people of God, is that God is speaking and we hear it. But sometimes what we do or we hear drifts away from what God was actually saying. Have you seen that, Chris?
Oh, absolutely. I say I think it's throughout all the Old Testament. As far as people hearing from God and not hearing from God, and God wasn't playing with folks back then. He was striking them dead right then and there. So, I say, luckily that Jesus came and we don't have that same judgment that some of these people had to face back in the day.
Right. And so I believe the Lord let us see this I think he put it in the scripture so we can see this and see how God is serious about us following his word. I think, like you said, I think the only reason why, we don't fall down dead because we don't do what God said is because of Christ. And, and so God is very serious about people hearing and obeying, people hearing what he says and doing exactly what he says. Now, when we look in scripture, there's a lot of examples of God giving instruction and people doing actually what he said.
Yeah.
And it turned out that it happened just like God said, right?
Absolutely.
So we see that in scripture. And then we see those who, and Israel leaving out of Egypt with Moses is though a great example of hearing, kind of sort of doing, maybe not doing, doing, listening now. We get a lot of that when we see what happened with Israel when they came out of Egypt. The Lord told Israel to say, look, I'm going to bring you to a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm going to bring you to a land of promise. Moses relayed that to the people. They heard what God said. Okay. They got out there in the wilderness and all of a sudden they forgot. They forgot that God said, I'm going to bring you to a land of promise. They started accusing God of bringing them to the wilderness to die.
Right.
They started murmuring, as the Bible says, beginning to murmuring and complaining. And so, my question, I guess my thoughts on this as we talk today is, did they really hear God? It's kind of like, did you hear what God said? And I think a lot of Christians are lacking in that capacity.
Absolutely. I've been guilty of it myself.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because, God says stuff, and of course we can talk from reference of people not actually can't hear what God's saying, and of course that's the issue also when you can't hear
Right.
God and you can't hear from what God is speaking to you. That's the issue. But I think more Christians though are suffering from, not applying what God is saying,
Hmm.
because here's the thing: if you can read the Bible, you can hear a lot of what God is saying. You
Absolutely.
know what I'm saying? If you can read scriptures, you can get a lot of what God is saying. Even if you're not in a place where you can discern his voice in the spirit realm,
Hmm.
if you read scriptures, you can hear what God is saying. The scriptures will tell you what God is saying. But still, regardless of everything, we have an application issue. So they're not really, it's like when you say something, like speak to a child, you say, hey, take the trash out, and they don't do it. They heard you, but they didn't really hear you. It didn't really connect with them
Right.
that, you know, I told them to do this. And so I think that's the issue that we're seeing in the body of Christ right now.
Absolutely. Um, I'd say it's a disconnect. Um, and a lot of times when you're disconnected, you know, even in marriages, sometimes husband and wives they get disconnected from one another and they have to find a way to reconnect. And I think that's the same with us and God. And one way to do that is by fasting.
Right, right. So tell us about fasting. How has fasting helped you hear from God better?
I can give you a perfect example. Around the time me and my wife were getting ready to get married, and we were looking for an apartment, we had some issues um, with her and on her credit wise. Just being able to put the apartment in both of our names. And around that time, we were on a corporate fast for the church, and we end up during that fast or right at the end of the fast, we were approved for that particular apartment that we were trying to get. And like I said, we were kind of, like I say, on in a kind of crunch time, with being moving out from one apartment to go into another because we hadn't renewed the lease at the other one. That was, I think, one of the first times that we from fasting, but we were able to truly not only hear from God, but truly trust God, and He showed Himself, faithful to us.
Right, right, right. Yeah, fasting definitely clears a lot of the clutter. I think that when we're trying to hear and get direction from God and get, guidance from him, I think that, when we're going to work, we're dealing with family, we're dealing with, for some people, children,
Hmm.
we're dealing with all manner of things. We're dealing with the internet, we're dealing with social media, we're dealing with our phone, we're dealing with, whatever entertainment we have. We have all these different things that are available to us all the time. I remember growing up as a child, TV would go off at a certain time.
Right.
There was no cell phones. There was no social media. And so
Hmm.
there would be times in the evening where you had no option other than you sleeping or you can spend some time with God. Because if you got up, the TV, there would be no television on. There would be no phone, no cell phone, I should say. There's no social media. Everybody's asleep. And so it was probably easier to connect with God during that time than it is now, because now you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's plenty on television. There's movies on. You can go on the internet. I mean, you can do
Right.
all manner of things, and and so, but fasting breaks that power of those things that's over you, and it gives you a clear connection to really be able to hear and move in what God is saying at that particular moment.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of times we don't realize how cluttered we are. Like the old folks used to say, oh, it's time to do some spring cleaning. When you spring cleaning, you clearing out your house and cleaning up things and getting into a place where it's you're comfortable and you can live in it. It's the same
Right.
thing with fasting. We have to clear out all that clutter. That way we can clearly hear what the Spirit of the Lord is trying to tell us, or trying to, or whatever message He is trying to get to us.
Yeah, absolutely. That is 100% truth. I look at Moses and what Moses was going through, and he was having all these people whining and complaining, and they was thirsty, and they was wanting to go back into captivity. All this stuff was going on. So Moses had a lot going on. He was, and his speech wasn't that great. So he wasn't like this great, a picture of a great leader. He wasn't a natural picture of a great leader.
Right.
And so he had all this stuff going on, and God, at the same time, God is saying, "Look, I need you to speak to the rock before their eyes." But he didn't. He wasn't really listening like he should have been. Either he wasn't listening, or he heard it, but he didn't feel like doing it.
Right. Right.
Either one was bad.
Right. I think Moses was tired. He was like, he had a lot of frustration. He was like, you know what? I ain't speaking. I'm just gonna hit this thing and
Right.
let it be what it is.
Right. And so he was tired, and that's why we have to be careful. When God's giving us instruction, we don't want to act out of our tiredness, out of our frustration, out of our agitation, or whatever we're dealing with. We need to make sure that we're doing what God is saying, no matter how tired we are. I know there's been many times I was tired, I was wore out, but I had to do what God was saying.
Right.
And and it's funny, that when Moses did that, when he hit the rock, it did what it was supposed to do. Now that's the funny part.
Right.
It did what it was supposed to do. But, we understand that it still didn't turn out good for them. But God was angered, but on the front side, and this is where I think we get messed up. We hear partially from God because we're too busy with other things, or we don't do what God says.
Yep.
But we don't realize at the moment that we made a bad step.
Right.
Because we may still get some progress. It's kind of like asking God, Lord, what do I need to do, to get me a wife? And Lord says, do A, B, C, and D. Right. You go do A and B, and you end up with a wife. You're like, man, I got my wife. You going about your business, and next thing you know, you're in a bad place with this person. You're like, man, why is this all crazy? Why is it messed up? Well, maybe if you did C and D also, you may have met somebody else that God actually had for you.
Right. And I don't think Moses had a lack of faith.
Right.
I say he was definitely tired. And when we're tired and fatigued, the mind has, its way of controlling the body.
Right.
And not, letting our spirit man control how we should feel and how we should act.
Right.
And he's human. I mean, I think we've all been there.
Absolutely.
Where we just, was, it's not that we don't love God and we don't want to obey him, but we were just at a, you may have been at a point where it's just like, Lord, I can't no more. This is all I got.
Right.
That's all I got.
Right. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I definitely think we see, the Bible shows a lot of human in a lot of people. And Moses, there was a lot of human in him, and some things he did right, and then some things he didn't do right. And I think all of us fall into that. All of us do some things right and there's nobody walking around that's perfect under their own strength.
Right.
The only perfection we find is through Christ.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a lesson that we have to understand, that look, some things may not go our way, but we need to be seeking to, like I told my son the other day, I said, look, man, I said, if you just do what I say, I said, he would do something and he'd be in trouble. And I'd be like, I sit down with him. I'd be like, why'd you do that, son? He'd be like, I don't know. I said, all you had to do was do what I say.
Yep.
And you wouldn't have this problem. I said, you're in unnecessary problems. You're in unnecessary trouble because you didn't do what I said. And it was no reason for you not to.
Love it.
Other than maybe you got distracted or whatever, And I think that's how times God looks at us. It's like, man, why didn't you just do what I said do? Why?
Exactly. I think it's a faith element at times. Like I say, because we can't see what it's going to produce. That right there alone is it causes us to hesitate.
Absolutely causes us to hesitate, man.
It
Yeah.
causes us to hesitate. So I'm saying that, it's a faith element, a part of it as well, because
Right.
when we haven't been in that situation personally, you may hear other people's stories and they tell you certain things, but when you yourself have not been in that situation and you have option A and option B, and God told you to do option A, and you decide to do option B, that puts us in a situation where, okay, we have a lack of faith. Not saying that God still won't do it, but it may not be to the extent that He wanted to do it for us.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Nah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And it's people's faith, man, has a lot to do with how clouded their hearing is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we become, sometimes we can become intimidated by what God is saying, and
Mm-hmm.
so we don't really want to hear it, or sometimes, what I'm saying, we just not there. We're just not there,
Yep.
you know. God, like for instance, God, I tell you a great example of that is Gideon. You know, when the angel of the Lord came to Gideon and called him mighty man of valor. You
He
know,
said, "I'm the least in my house."
right, right, right. He automatically went and talked about how little of a person he was.
Right.
you know, and he said he the least of the least. You know, and then you know he went out to get the people, and then what happened? He went out and did things according to
Mm-hmm.
what he thought was sufficient. You know, he went out and got a whole bunch of people, and the guy said, you got too many people. You know, and then he did another. He said, tell all the ones that are fearful, go home. And then
Mm-hmm.
he cut it down a nice amount, and Gideon was like, I'm ready. He's like, no, no. He said, you got too many people. Take it down by the waterside.
Yep.
And ultimately, the Lord wanted the ones who were the most humble. That's how I
Mm-hmm.
took it. When they said the ones that got in their face and lapped like a dog, I'm
Right.
I'm taking that to mean the ones who were not puffed up, who were
Mm-hmm.
not vain, who won't worry about what people thought about them.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Their heart was right.
Right. He
You
said
know,
they don't need a cup to drink out of. Hey, however I gotta get it, I gotta get it.
that's right. He wanted people with pure hearts, and you know what I'm saying, had the right mindset. And the Lord said, "Those are my people.
Yep.
Those are the ones." And then the funny thing is, they didn't even have to fight. I mean, they didn't even have to physically fight. You would think, you would think that somebody tell you to get the people together. You thinking y'all about to go to a brawl. That's why
Mm-hmm.
Gideon gathered up so many. He's like, well, if we didn't brawl, make sure I can hide amongst these 30,000.
Right. Right.
you know, but you know, God is speaking to us. We need to hear Him. We need to listen to Him. You
Mm-hmm.
know, God told Gideon, "You're a mighty man of valor. Don't start to decrease yourself because you don't believe it, because you don't
Right.
have the faith in it.
Right.
Embrace what God said. Whatever God's telling you, embrace it." You know, same thing happened with Abraham. You know, God told Abraham and his wife they was going to have a child. What happened?
They lied.
They got to laughing. They got to laughing. Because they could not wrap their minds around it. And I'm sure the Lord was like, "Did not you hear what I said? I
Right.
said
I see it. Right.
you gonna have a child." You know, and so Abraham's wife was even full of excuses. But I'm too old. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we do. We start making excuses for the things that God is telling us, the instructions He's given. We even begin to make excuses on why we can't accomplish it. You
Yep.
know, oh, the Lord said you're gonna do this. Oh, I don't have enough money, or I'm not this enough, or I'm not that enough. And the Lord said, "Didn't I call you? Didn't
Right.
you hear what I said?"
Right. I can give you a perfect example. I remember around the time that my parents were getting divorced. It was just a few years ago. And I remember waking up, it was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I had tears in my eyes, and I was just praying to the Lord. I said, Lord, what do you need me to do, and what should I do?
Right.
And at the time, I was working um, as a loan officer at this company, and I was scraping the barrel, at the bottom of the barrel. I was making my phone calls, doing what I was supposed to do. I was like, Lord, what am I gonna do? And he told me to quit my job. I was like, dude, what? Clear as
Mm.
day. Told me to quit my
He was
job.
stretching you out, man. He was
Oh,
stretching you out, brother.
whew. And I was like, Lord, I can't quit my job. I said, I'm gonna pay my bill. I said, granted, the money that they're giving me ain't much, but it's something. I was like, where am I gonna go? Where am I gonna go? And ultimately, it took me 6+ months before I quit. And by that time, I was extremely dry. I had a
Right.
deal come back on me. They took some money out from my commission
Mm.
because the deal had, was reimbursed because the lady had decided she wanted to sell her house after she refinanced and she hadn't waited the 6 month mark. Like I said, I mean, it got chaotic. And I always look back and I was like, what would have happened had I quit my job prior
When
to
God
that
said,
when he
yeah,
said to do it?
yeah, yeah. You heard God, but you really weren't listening.
Yep,
You really didn't hear what he was saying. You
right.
know what I'm
And
saying?
and and the thing is, we ask for help, and then when he speaks and gives it to us, it's like,
Yeah.
did you really just say that?
Right, right, right. Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice and they obey, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so, you know, if we're his sheep, we don't just hear, we do it. We do what God is saying. And there's a fruit um that comes from that. There's blessings that come from that. And I think people miss out that. If you do what God said, the Lord is never leading you into a hole, you know. And
Right,
while it may sound like it's stretching you out, while it may sound like it's going to be some difficulties, some problems, some pain, some frustrations, the Lord will never lead you into a hole. You
right,
know, every direction He's giving you is leading you, taking you somewhere. You know, it's just like the Lord had Elijah out there slaying the prophets of Jezebel,
mm-hmm.
and the Lord was directing him in that. But as soon as what I'm saying, Jezebel came back at him, he ran off. He ran off.
Yep. He did, like I
And
said, the fun thing, he didn't get scared until she said something.
right, it was like you thought it was you that was slaying these prophets of Jezebel. It was the Lord. You think the fire coming out of the sky was you?
Right,
It was the Lord. And so now you're fearful of a person, a human. You know, he had forgot. And I think sometimes our dynamics, we start we start giving things more credit than they need credit. We start giving more power to things that don't actually have power.
right,
And we need to be relying on the Lord and say, hey, this thing pops his head, don't give power to that. The Lord, what did the Lord say? It's just like Israel in the wilderness, and it was going up against the sea, and they start crying out, "We're gonna die, we're gonna die." The Lord didn't bring you out uh, uh, a little bit outside of the Egypt for you to die up against the sea.
right.
Why would the Lord do that? Why would He perform miracle signs and wonders to get you free to only leave you hanging? You know, and you know, and so when God is telling you things, you may not have the whole piece. See, God didn't say, okay, while you're in the wilderness, I'm going to feed you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to
Right.
partner. See, God didn't say all that. He said, look, I got land flowing with milk and honey. Go for it.
Go. Right. I need you to go there. That's it.
You're right, right. That's all he said. And so they didn't have all the details. I think the details, when we hear from God, I think the details mess us up. Not
Mm-hmm.
having them is what I'm saying.
Right,
You
right.
know, we want to know, we got a 10-mile journey. We want to know what's going to happen at mile 1, mile 2, mile 3. And God may not tell you that, you know, but because he said, he told you to go there, he's
Right.
got provision all the way
Mm-hmm.
through.
Right. Like I said, that's like God saying, I need you to go down the street, go past 3 lights and make a left.
Yes.
And if you do it, there's something there, obviously. Otherwise, he wouldn't tell you to go down the street, go 3 lights and make a left.
Obviously, he would not tell you to do it. Exactly. Exactly. And so us listening to God and doing what he says is absolutely essential um, to us living a life that is fully blessed and fully, getting the fullness of what God has for us, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, man, I do appreciate you coming on this show today. I thank everybody else for tuning in and who has tuned in and listening to this program. This has been the Kingdom Authority program. Thank you so much, Chris. I greatly appreciate you. Guys, we'll talk to you later. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Kingdom Authority podcast. Join us every week for powerful teachings, insightful interviews, and testimonies of God's power. To contact us for more info on books and articles from James Alford, make sure you go to jamesalford.org.